Sign the addendum, Julian. We have dinner reservations at 6. Human Resources Director Lyle Halloway slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany conference table without looking up from his tablet. It was Friday afternoon at precisely 4:55. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale glare over the glass-walled corner office. Standing beside him was Bradford Cross, our Vice President of Enterprise Growth, leaning against the doorframe with an artisanal espresso and a predatory smirk. The kind of look an executive gives when he thinks he is playing chess, but is actually just knocking over pieces on the board. "What is this, Lyle?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and neutral. "It is a necessary adjustment to your annual performance structure," Lyle said, tapping his pen against the glass. "Given macroeconomic headwinds and internal corporate restructuring, executive leadership has decided to reallocate variable compensation pools. Your $300,000 bonus has been revised to $60,000. Effective immediately. An 80% cut on a bonus earned over 12 months of 75-hour work weeks, explicitly tied to revenue targets, I had blown out of the water by 140%. Bradford took a slow sip of his espresso, his tone oozing condescension. "Look at it as a reality check, Julian. In this economic climate, a man your age should be grateful he still has a desk here on Monday morning. $60,000 is more than generous for a back-office technical specialist." I sat in complete silence. "My name is Julian Vance. I am 48 years old, and for 8 long years, I served as the principal enterprise risk architect at Aegis Financial Technologies. I built the compliance, risk governance, and enterprise security frameworks that kept this multi-million-dollar institution alive. I was the architect who stayed until 2 in the morning, making sure our global clients slept soundly at night without fear of regulatory audits or system failures." Bradford thought I was going to break down. Lyle thought I was going to raise my voice, slam my hands on the table, or beg them to reconsider so I could continue paying for my mother's specialized medical care. They expected panic. They expected a desperate employee willing to crawl for corporate scraps. What they did not know was that I was not paying attention to Bradford's speech. I was reading the fine print at the bottom of the page. In their rush to strip $240,000 out of my pocket before the weekend, no doubt to reallocate it toward their own executive quarterly profit distributions, Lyle had committed a fatal error. Paragraph 3 explicitly stated that my core employment contract terms were being unilaterally modified, without the mandatory 30-day written notice required under state labor law and statutory wage regulations. Under Section 14 of my original employment agreement, any unilateral, unnotified alteration of variable earned compensation legally invalidated my restrictive covenant. In plain English, my non-compete clause was null and void the second they handed me that signed paper. I picked up the pen. "I will sign acknowledging receipt," I said softly, time-stamping my signature at 4:58 on Friday afternoon. I stood up, walked back to my desk, and packed 8 years of my career into a single cardboard box. I handed my security key card to the front desk guard, stepped into the rain-slicked elevator, and looked directly into the security camera lens. I whispered 14 words they would hear in their nightmares by Monday morning. "You just traded a $75 million account for a $240,000 bonus cut." When I reached my car on level 3 of the parking garage, I did not shed a tear. I set my box in the trunk and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. My mind was completely clear. For 8 years, I had poured my life into Aegis Financial Technologies. When I was hired, Aegis was a struggling financial tech outfit operating out of a cramped office with barely 3 months of capital left. We were on the verge of missing payroll every single pay period. I believed that if I stayed loyal and produced exceptional technical work, the company would reward that dedication. That was my fundamental mistake. Over those 8 years, I surrendered my personal life piece by piece. I delayed starting a family and stopped seeing longtime friends. When my younger brother got married 6 years ago, I spent his entire reception sitting on a bench outside with my laptop, manually patching a critical data leak in our auditing pipeline. 3 years ago, when my mother fell ill, I worked 75 hours a week just to cover her medical bills while keeping Aegis operations running flawlessly. I ended up in the emergency room twice for acute exhaustion, hooked up to an intravenous drip, still reviewing compliance documents from a hospital bed. And where were Bradford Cross and Lyle Halloway during those grueling years? Bradford was taking six-figure client trips to luxury resorts and hosting executive retreats on private yachts. He would show up at shareholder meetings wearing $3,000 suits, present the frameworks I had built, and take credit for our growth. Whenever I brought up my equity partnership promised when I joined, Bradford would smile patronizingly and say, "We are almost there, Julian. Just give us one more strong quarter. You are the backbone of this company." It was all a lie. They did not see me as a partner. They saw me as a quiet, reliable engine in the basement that ran without complaint. They mistook my discipline for desperation. Sitting in my car, as rain tapped against the windshield, I opened my briefcase and pulled out my private personal binder, a leather-bound ledger I had kept since my very first day at the company. Inside were original unedited copies of every operational agreement, system architecture diagram, and most importantly, the original key person service addendum for Aegis's single largest account. Bradford and Lyle thought they had just saved the firm $240,000 on a Friday afternoon. They had no idea that the moment I walked out those doors, the clock began ticking on the $75 million anchor holding their entire enterprise together. I drove 2 blocks down the street and parked in the quiet lot of a 24-hour diner. The rain was coming down harder now, washing over the glass while the neon sign flickered through the dark. I turned off the engine, opened my laptop, and connected to my private encrypted network to review the true scale of what executive leadership had just thrown away. At Aegis Financial Technologies, everyone understood that Montgomery Global Enterprise was our crown jewel. They were a massive international financial conglomerate operating across 4 continents. Their annual retainer with Aegis was $75 million, a colossal contract representing roughly 40% of our firm's entire annual revenue. In fact, Aegis's upcoming multi-billion-dollar valuation for their next institutional funding round relied almost entirely on the guaranteed cash flow from that single enterprise client. Bradford Cross loved to parade the Montgomery Global contract around at shareholder dinners like he had personally secured it with his charm, expensive golf memberships, and steak lunches. That was a complete fabrication. 3 years ago, Bradford's sales team signed Montgomery Global using a rushed compliance framework to hit quota targets. 2 months later, internal auditors uncovered a massive $18 million accounting discrepancy in the automated risk reporting system Bradford had promised them. If that error had hit the Federal Regulatory Board, Montgomery Global would have faced catastrophic fines, frozen trading licenses, and a devastating public relations disaster. Calvin Montgomery, the founder and chief executive officer of Montgomery Global Enterprise, had personally flown into our city on his private jet, ready to cancel the contract, sue Aegis for gross negligence, and effectively bankrupt our firm on the spot. While Bradford made desperate excuses to the board, I stepped into the conference room with Calvin Montgomery. I spent 72 hours rebuilding Bradford's broken code into a custom compliance and risk governance algorithm. I located the $18 million discrepancy, proved it was a software logic error rather than fraud, and presented a patched system that passed federal inspection with 0 flags. Calvin Montgomery looked at me across that boardroom table, signed the regulatory clearance, and said words I would never forget. "Julian, I do not put my trust in corporate logos or flashy sales representatives. I put my trust in real people with absolute integrity. You are the only reason this firm still has my business." Before resigning the agreement, Calvin insisted on a mandatory key person clause. Paragraph 8B explicitly stated that Aegis's contract was strictly contingent upon my direct personal oversight of their account portfolio. If my employment with Aegis was ever terminated, altered, reassigned, or severed, for any reason, Montgomery Global retained the immediate legal right to cancel their $75 million contract without penalty or notice. Bradford had signed that contract 3 years ago without reading the fine print addendums because he was too busy celebrating his executive commission check. He literally forgot the clause existed, and that was not the only legal trap waiting in my leather binder. Before I ever joined Aegis as an employee, I operated as an independent software architect. I had developed and registered a proprietary risk analysis governance matrix under my own personal consulting firm's copyright, with the United States Copyright Office, under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. My attorney back then ensured that the copyright, patent rights, and underlying source code remained strictly in my personal name, granting Aegis only a revocable operational license. When Aegis hired me 8 years ago, I did not sell them the code. I granted them a conditional non-exclusive operational license, a license explicitly tied to my active ongoing employment status. Without me in the building, Aegis did not just lose the individual who managed their biggest client. They legally lost the right to run the software engine that executed audit risk checks for every enterprise account in their portfolio. Sitting in my car, I ran a quick diagnostic check on my private server. My remote access key was still active, but the automated license expiration countdown timer was already ticking down towards 0. The security protocol required my personal biometric key to reauthorize the compliance matrix every 72 hours. Without that authorization, the entire platform would automatically switch into emergency, read-only lockdown mode. They thought they had just cut my bonus by $240,000 to pad their executive distribution pool. In reality, they had just pulled the pin on a $75 million financial grenade, handed it to themselves, and smiled. By 6:30 on Friday evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a hot mug of tea. My personal cell phone buzzed on the counter. It was an automated notification from Aegis's internal broadcast system. An all-hands email Bradford Cross had broadcast to all 300 employees just before leaving his office for the weekend. I opened the message. The subject line read, "A record quarter built on executive excellence." As we head into the weekend, Bradford had written, "I am thrilled to announce that Aegis has achieved unprecedented quarterly revenue growth. This milestone is a testament to visionary executive leadership and disciplined cost management. While certain underperforming team members continue to demand unearned compensation, true corporate leaders make the hard financial decisions necessary to protect overall profitability." He had literally used my stolen bonus money to brag to the entire company about his executive brilliance. 10 minutes later, at exactly 6:40, my remote corporate access went dark. Lyle Halloway had officially revoked my system credentials. Then came a direct text message from Lyle's personal cell phone. "Julian, your remote access has been terminated. As a formal reminder, Paragraph 9 of your employment agreement contains a strict 2-year non-compete clause. If you attempt to solicit any Aegis clients or seek employment with competing firms, our legal team will immediately pursue full injunctive relief and maximum financial damages. Enjoy your weekend." I did not reply. I simply took a screenshot of the text message, saved it, and backed it up to my private cloud drive alongside my signed HR addendum. At 7:45, my phone rang again. It was Laura Briggs, a senior risk analyst on my former team who had always been deeply loyal to me. Her voice was shaking with anxiety. "Julian, what on earth just happened?" she whispered. "Bradford called an emergency department meeting 20 minutes ago. He told the entire staff that you suffered a severe emotional breakdown, could not handle the pressure of the upcoming audit, and resigned effective immediately." "That is what he told everyone?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Yes, and it gets worse," Laura continued, her tone filled with outrage. "He just reassigned the entire Montgomery Global account to his 24-year-old nephew, Corey. Corey does not even know how to run a basic compliance audit. Julian, he was literally asking me 5 minutes ago where the master database administrative passwords were stored. That was the exact moment any remaining sliver of doubt or hesitation vanished from my mind. Bradford had not just stolen $240,000 from me. He had publicly attacked my professional reputation, lied to my colleagues, and handed a $75 million client account to an arrogant, unqualified relative who was going to destroy 8 years of my work. They genuinely believed I was trapped and beaten. They thought the non-compete held me in a cage, that my quiet exit was a sign of submission, and that I would suffer in silence while they celebrated. They mistook my quiet discipline for fear. They failed to realize that their own hubris was accelerating their downfall. I thanked Laura for the call, advised her to stay out of the crossfire, and hung up. I took a sip of my tea, opened my leather binder, and laid out 3 key documents side by side across the kitchen table. My original employment contract, the HR compensation addendum I had signed at 4:58, and the Montgomery Global Key Person Master Agreement. The legal logic was sharp, flawless, and completely undeniable. By slashing my variable compensation by 80%, without providing 30 days written notice, HR had committed a material breach of contract under state labor law. The moment an employer breaches payment terms, the employee is unbundled from every restrictive obligation. A material breach by an employer legally nullifies all restrictive covenants, including non-competes, non-solicitations, and non-disclosure restrictions regarding operational methods. Gavin and Lyle thought they had locked me out of the industry. In reality, their hurried paperwork had handed me complete legal freedom. I looked at the wall clock. It was 11:58 at night. I picked up my phone and selected the private number saved under Calvin Montgomery Direct. It was time to make my Saturday morning call. On Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, I sat down for an emergency virtual meeting with my employment attorney, Howard Ellis. I shared my screen, presenting my original contract, the 455 addendum signed by Lyle Halloway, and the text message warning me about the non-compete. Howard carefully reviewed the paperwork for 10 minutes in complete silence. When he looked up, a slow smile spread across his face. "Julian, they handed you a masterclass in executive stupidity," he said. "In this jurisdiction, variable performance bonuses tied to explicit metrics are considered enforceable wages under state labor law. By unilaterally slashing your earned compensation by 80% without 30 days written notice, Aegis committed a material breach of contract." He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "The moment an employer commits a material breach of payment terms, the entire contract is legally severed at their fault. Your non-compete, your non-solicitation, and your intellectual property restrictions are officially dead. You are completely free. That was all the authorization I needed." At 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, I dialed the private line of Calvin Montgomery. He answered on the 3rd ring from his estate in Connecticut. "Julian," he said, his voice warm and sharp. "I do not usually get calls from you on a Saturday morning. Is everything all right with our compliance protocols?" "Good morning, Calvin," I replied calmly. "I am calling to inform you directly that as of 4:55 yesterday afternoon, I am no longer with Aegis Financial Technologies. I submitted my resignation following constructive dismissal and severe material contract breaches by executive leadership." The line went dead silent for 5 long seconds. "What did you just say?" Calvin asked, his tone dropping into pure executive frost. "I did not rant or attack Bradford Cross personally. I simply delivered the facts with surgical precision. I explained that my performance bonus had been cut by 80%, that my remote access was revoked, and that the firm had reassigned the Montgomery Global portfolio to Bradford's 24-year-old nephew. When I finished speaking, I heard Calvin take a slow, heavy breath on the other end of the line. Bradford Cross actually thought he could remove the key architect of my auditing infrastructure and hand my $75 million account to a child? Calvin asked, quietly. "That appears to be their strategy," I said. "Furthermore, my proprietary compliance software license expired upon my departure. Aegis no longer possesses the legal or technical authority to run auditing models on your accounts." "Unbelievable," Calvin said, the anger in his voice palpable. "I did not sign a contract with Aegis, Julian. I signed a contract with you. Section 8B of our Master Services Agreement is explicitly clear. If you are not managing our account, Aegis is in breach. I am launching my own independent consulting firm on Monday morning," I told him quietly. "Summit Risk Advisory. My legal team is filing the corporate registration today." "So over the framework agreement," Calvin said instantly, without a second of hesitation. "My personal legal counsel will review it within the hour. By Monday morning at 8, Montgomery Global will terminate its contract with Aegis for key person default, and we will execute a direct retainer with Summit Risk Advisory. I am doubling your old salary baseline. I need you running our systems by noon on Monday. By 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the signed retainer framework was secured in my inbox. My legal counsel filed the business creation documents, and Summit Risk Advisory was officially born. I spent Sunday completely disconnected from corporate stress. I backed up my private records, reorganized my home office, and prepared a homemade dinner for my family. My mother sat at the dining room table, smiling as we talked about the future. For the first time in 8 years, I felt no anxiety and no weight on my shoulders. I set my alarm for 8 o'clock in the morning, muted my phone notifications, and slept soundly, knowing the fuse was already burning down inside Aegis headquarters. By Monday, they were going to learn that arrogance has a very specific price tag, and every single dollar of that price tag was due immediately. At 8 o'clock sharp on Monday morning, Bradford Cross strolled into Aegis headquarters wearing a brand new tailored suit, holding a vanilla latte. He glided past the reception desk, nodding smugly at junior staff, thoroughly eager to celebrate his quarterly metrics and start taking personal credit for managing his newly acquired $75 million crown jewel account. He did not even make it to the mahogany desk in his executive office. At 8:02, a high-priority certified legal notice landed simultaneously in the electronic inboxes of the board of directors, Bradford Cross and Lyle Halloway. It was a formal notice of immediate contract termination, sent directly from the senior legal counsel of Montgomery Global Enterprise. The letter stated in cold legal language that effective immediately, Montgomery Global was exercising its right to terminate its agreement under paragraph 8B of the Master Services Agreement due to Aegis's material failure to maintain key person continuity. They were pulling their $75 million account, freezing all pending invoice disbursements, and demanding an immediate total audit return of all proprietary corporate data files. The notice added that Montgomery Global had formally retained Summit Risk Advisory as their exclusive new global risk firm. Before Bradford finished reading, red warning lights flashed across the engineering department floor. Having passed the 72-hour mark without biometric reauthorization, my security key had expired. The core compliance software platform, the proprietary governance algorithm I had independently developed and registered under Title 17 copyright law, automatically reverted into emergency lockdown mode. All real-time auditing feeds across 3 major enterprise consulting divisions froze instantly. Panic erupted across the floor. Bradford dropped his coffee cup onto the carpet, sprinted down the hallway to the engineering bay, and began screaming at his nephew, Corey. "Fix it right now! Override the system!" Bradford bellowed, slamming his palm against the console. "Type in the administrative master override password and get these systems back online." Corey, pale as a sheet and sweating profusely through his dress shirt, completely panicked under the pressure. He attempted to brute force the encrypted root directory using generic IT override codes he had found in an old training manual. That was their second catastrophic mistake. Designed to detect unauthorized forced entries, the system triggered an automatic Level 3 security lockdown the moment Corey attempted to bypass encryption. The entire compliance database sealed itself, wiping local temporary caches and completely locking out every terminal in the building. Over 70 ongoing client compliance reports were instantly halted midway through processing, leaving major financial institutions without their required daily audit validations. By 9:30 morning, Aegis Financial Technologies was in complete operational paralysis. The board of directors called an emergency closed-door meeting on the top floor. News of Montgomery Global's contract termination had already leaked to market analysts, and Aegis's pre-market enterprise valuation plummeted by 45% in less than 90 minutes. Tens of millions of dollars in projected market capital evaporated before the official opening bell even rang. Institutional investors were calling the main line every 15 seconds, screaming at panicked receptionists, demanding to know why the firm's compliance infrastructure was down and why its anchor account had walked out the door. The board chairman was slamming his fist on the mahogany table, demanding to know who authorized the bonus cut that triggered the key person default clause. Down in HR, Lyle Halloway was hyperventilating. He grabbed a master passkey, ran down the hall to my former office, and plugged an external diagnostic drive into my old desktop terminal. He was frantically attempting to locate my source code files, administrative override passwords, or system recovery documentation. When the monitor turned on, the local storage drives were completely clean. In the exact center of the desktop screen sat a single red document titled Notice of Intellectual Property Retraction and Legal Breach. Lyle opened it with trembling hands. The document contained an official notice from my employment attorney outlining that my proprietary software license was officially revoked upon my constructive dismissal and that any attempt by Aegis to copy, crack, or operate my algorithm would result in an immediate federal copyright infringement lawsuit under Title 17, United States Code, Section 501, seeking maximum statutory damages. Lyle realized in that terrifying instant what he had done on Friday at 4:55. He thought he was saving $240,000 on a performance bonus to impress the board. Instead, he had dismantled the technical engine of the entire firm and handed the company's biggest client directly to the competition. By 11 o'clock, screaming matches broke out inside the executive boardroom. Board members were openly shouting at Bradford Cross, pointing fingers, demanding to know why he had allowed the firm's most critical architect to walk out the door over a bonus dispute. At 11:15, I was sitting peacefully at an outdoor table at a sunny downtown cafe, enjoying a warm croissant and reading the financial news on my tablet. My personal phone buzzed on the marble table. The screen lit up with an incoming caller ID. Aegis Executive Office, Conference Room 1. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, let it ring 3 times, and pressed speakerphone. Julian, is that you? Can you hear me? It was Bradford Cross, the slick, arrogant, booming voice that had spent 8 years taking credit for my late nights was completely gone. In its place was a breathless, trembling wreck of a man speaking from the center of a crowded executive conference room. In the background, I could hear the furious chatter of board members and the constant hum of ringing office phones. "Good morning, Bradford," I said, keeping my tone perfectly smooth, unbothered, and conversational. "I am enjoying my morning coffee. How is your Monday going?" "Julian, please," Bradford blurted out, abandoning every trace of his executive ego. "We are all in the main boardroom right now, the entire executive committee and the board chairman. There has been a massive misunderstanding. A terrible, catastrophic mistake was made on Friday afternoon, and we need to rectify it right now." I took a slow sip of my espresso and leaned back against the iron chair. "A misunderstanding, Bradford? On Friday at 4:55, you sat next to Lyle Halloway and told me that an 80% bonus cut was generous for a back-office technical specialist. You told me I should be grateful to keep my desk. A heavy, painful silence fell over the conference room speakerphone. "That was a mistake, Julian," Bradford pleaded frantically. "I was misinformed about departmental allocations. Look, we are prepared to make this right immediately. We will pay you the full $300,000 bonus today. We will add a $150,000 retention signing bonus on top of it. And the board has just authorized me to promote you immediately to Executive Vice President of Global Risk Architecture. You will have full executive voting power. Julian, just log back into the system, reauthorize your security clearance keys, and call Calvin Montgomery to tell him it was all an administrative error." It was incredible how quickly corporate bullies discover generosity once their own livelihoods are dangling over the edge. Before I could answer, Lyle Halloway cut in, his voice panicked and shrill. "Julian, you have to work with us here. If you refuse to return to your post and attempt to take Montgomery Global to your new entity, we will be forced to file an emergency injunction in federal court for breach of your non-compete clause. You signed a binding agreement. Lyle, put yourself on mute before you sink your firm even deeper into legal liability." A new voice interjected calmly onto the call. It was my attorney, Howard Ellis, whom I had patched into the 3-way call seconds after answering. "This is Howard Ellis, lead counsel representing Julian Vance," Howard stated, his voice echoing through their boardroom speakers. Lyle, let me educate you on labor law since your HR department clearly failed to do so. On Friday at 4:55, you handed my client a unilateral compensation reduction without the mandatory 30-day written notice required under state statute. That action constituted a material breach of contract by Aegis Financial Technologies. Under settled law, your material breach instantly nullified all restrictive covenants. My client's non-compete is legally void, his non-solicitation is dead, and his intellectual property rights have reverted entirely to his personal estate. If you file an injunction, we will countersue Aegis for constructive dismissal, unpaid wages, and bad faith litigation. Lyle gasped loudly on the line. I could hear paper shuffling in his hands as he realized his career was ending in real time. Then the deep, imposing voice of Aegis's board chairman took over the microphone. Julian, this is the chairman speaking. I am stepping in directly. We acknowledge that Bradford Cross and Lyle Halloway acted with gross incompetence and utter bad faith. If you return today and restore our systems, I will personally guarantee the immediate termination of both Bradford and Lyle before the end of the business day. We will meet any financial term you put on the table. I looked across the street at the glass tower where Summit Risk Advisory was setting up its new headquarters. I felt no anger, no hatred, and no desire for petty revenge. All I felt was absolute clarity. Mr. Chairman, I said softly into the microphone, my price has not gone up. It simply no longer exists for Aegis. I built your core systems on trust, integrity, and hard work. Your executive team destroyed that trust for $240,000 on a Friday afternoon. I do not rebuild trust with people who treat integrity as negotiable. Julian, please. Bradford screamed as panic overtook him completely. You are destroying us! No, Bradford, I replied coolly. You destroyed yourselves at 4:55 on Friday afternoon. Have a wonderful week. I tapped the screen, disconnected the call, and muted my phone. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office on the 42nd floor of the financial district's premier skyscraper. A brass plaque beside my doorway read, Summit Risk Advisory. Julian Vance, founder and chief executive officer. Starting my own firm was not just about financial independence. It was about building a corporate culture where brilliant, dedicated professionals were respected, valued, and compensated fairly for the immense value they created. In our first 6 months of operation, Summit Risk Advisory did not just survive. We dominated the enterprise risk sector. Calvin Montgomery's $75 million account was the bedrock that allowed us to scale rapidly. Within 90 days, word of our compliance matrix spread throughout the financial community. 4 major institutional clients who had grown tired of Aegis's bloated fees and arrogant management walked away from their old contracts and signed multi-year retainers with Summit. I did not build this empire alone. The very first thing I did after securing our corporate charter was reach out to the most talented, underappreciated analysts and software engineers I had worked with at Aegis, including Laura Briggs. I offered them double their former salaries, full remote flexibility, real equity profit sharing, and a work culture free from corporate politics. They jumped ship without a second thought, bringing their incredible work ethic to a firm that actually valued their humanity. As for Aegis Financial Technologies, the fallout from that fateful Friday afternoon was swift, brutal, and permanent. Following the public loss of Montgomery Global Enterprise and the collapse of their automated audit systems, Aegis's stock price plummeted by 65% over the subsequent quarter. Institutional investors pulled billions in capital, forcing the board to initiate emergency cost-cutting measures. An independent internal investigation conducted by the board revealed the full extent of the gross mismanagement surrounding my departure. The board discovered that Bradford Cross had been falsely inflating operational stability metrics while reallocating earned employee bonuses toward executive distribution pools. The consequences were absolute. Bradford Cross and Lyle Halloway were both publicly terminated for cause, stripped of their unvested stock options, and escorted out of Aegis headquarters by private security guards in front of the entire staff. Without their corporate titles or client trust, both men found themselves blacklisted across the financial technology sector. their industry reputations permanently destroyed by their short-sighted greed. Bradford's nephew, Corey, was quietly let back into the entry-level applicant pool. After failing every basic audit put in front of him, standing in my sunlit office, looking over the skyline with a warm cup of coffee, I felt total peace. For 8 years, I believed my worth was defined by corporate titles and promises. I spent years afraid to speak up, convinced loyalty would be rewarded. I learned the most valuable lesson of my life on a rainy Friday afternoon at 4:55. True power is not given to you by a vice president or an HR department. True power resides in your own intellect, your undeniable competence, your personal integrity, and your willingness to walk away from anyone who treats your worth as negotiable. They thought they were stripping away my future when they handed me that single sheet of paper. They thought a quiet 48-year-old man would bow his head, take the pay cut, and keep slaving away in the basement while they celebrated their stolen wealth. They thought they were cutting my bonus by 80%. In reality, they just paid full price to learn who was actually running the company.